looks can be deceiving. Despite a very attractive and composed appearance, my guest has enormous grit and determination. She was the first woman to graduate from the male-dominated Citadel, and she's taken that fighting spirit all the way to our nation's capital. Join me for a conversation with Congresswoman Nancy Mace. Congresswoman Nancy Mace knows how to lead. Not only was she the first woman to graduate from the Citadel, one of the most prestigious military colleges in America, she's also the first Republican woman to be elected to Congress from South Carolina. She's a strong conservative, but as you are about to find out, she's also an independent thinker who isn't afraid to advocate for what she believes is right. And I'm honored to have Congresswoman Nancy Mace joining me today. Thanks for coming, Nancy.
And thank you so much for having me today and having me on.
Well, so Nancy, finally there's a few more Republican women joining you in Congress. And has that created a different kind of workplace atmosphere?
No, it's great. It's wonderful to be in the company of so many women who've achieved so much in their lifetime. And it's just a reminder that Democrats don't hold a monopoly on women. We have conservative women across the country who love their kids, who love their country, and have raised their hand to serve, and I'm honored to be counted among them.
So although there are a record number of women in Congress, we're not a monolith when it comes to our backgrounds and interests. How do you see these fresh voices perhaps changing the way the public views Republicans?
Well, I think it's very interesting. I mean, just the other day, there was a Democrat out of California who said she was the only single mom in Congress. Well, it's not true. There's more than one. There are a handful of us, myself and Beth Van Dyne, count 2 Republican single moms in Congress today. And I do think it changes the narrative. For a long time now, for several years, we've struggled with suburban moms and suburban women. And guess what? I am one of those. And I am conservative. And so I think it's a great opportunity to go after those folks and tell our stories in a way that resonates with everyday hardworking men and women in our country.
So I want to talk a bit about your background. There's an old adage that success isn't defined by what we achieve, but by what we've overcome. And I was hoping you would share with our viewers a rather horrific thing you experienced as a teenager, sexual assault. What happened, and more importantly, what it took to move on with your life, which you really have.
Right. No, it's one of the most terrifying times in my life. When I was 16, I was raped by someone that I went to school with. And for 25 years, it took me 25 years to finally tell that story to someone other than my mother and my best friend who knew about it at the time. But at the time in my life, it was devastating. And the older I've gotten, and I've told that story before, but there's another silent majority out there of women who have experienced sexual trauma, sexual assault, who've been raped, that I've later learned, and that doesn't see political party or political affiliation at all. But I dropped out of high school shortly thereafter, and I had no hope for my future. I didn't see a light at the end of the tunnel. I literally gave up on everything in my life, and that's when I took a job as a waitress at a Waffle House on the side of the interstate in a small town of Ladson, South Carolina. And back in those days, you didn't have online, you didn't really have online school. The internet was sort of brand new back in the mid 90s. But I was able to get my high school diploma by taking college classes at night and on the weekends. And it was a Citadel grad, a graduate of the Citadel, the Military College of South Carolina, who was my principal, my high school principal, and let me do that at the time. And it literally saved my life.
That's great, because a staggering number of women have been victims to sexual assault in their lives. And what is your message to them, and what needs to be explained to those who love them and may not know how to support them or what to say?
Right. It's a terrifying experience because you feel judged of what someone might say when they find out you've had this experience. And I would say, don't be afraid to have courage. One of the things that I learned as a cadet at the Citadel, the Military College of South Carolina, was about courage and about confidence. And I didn't have the opportunity or the ability to have the courage enough for myself to speak up at the time, which is why I think it's really important for me as a mom today, as someone who's been through that experience, to be a voice for those women, because so many when they do come forward, it's very hard to get a conviction. Statistics will tell you it's like 1 in a million. I mean, it's just so difficult to gather the evidence to get a conviction when these cases happen. But to the young women out there, to all women who've experienced this, is to have courage to speak up, have the courage that I didn't have at the age of 16. I think it's very important for many of us to tell those stories and let women know that they're not alone either. They're not alone.
Yeah. Exactly, and an experience like this has to be really hard to recover from. So have you done anything on the legislative front on the issue of sexual assault?
I'm sorry, I missed that last part. I'm having trouble hearing you.
I'm sorry. Have you done anything on the legislative front on the issue of sexual assault?
I have. There are a couple of things. Domestic abuse is an issue that I took up as a state lawmaker before I ran for Congress. I also, when South Carolina had its fetal heartbeat bill going through its chambers, its state legislative session, I put protections in there for women who've been raped or victims of incest. I feel it was really important, and I had no intention of telling my story in 2018 when all of this, or 2019 when all of this transpired, when the fetal heartbeat bill was coming through. But there were no voices. There was no one advocating for women who were victims of rape. And that's when I made the decision to tell the story, to try to make a difference for those women who've been affected by rape and by incest.
What a difference you have made. So Congresswoman Mace, you hold the distinction of being the first female graduate of the elite Citadel Military Academy.
Right.
When we come back, we're going to hear how that helped shape your life, and later, why you believe environmental conservation is a conservative issue. Hi, I'm Nancy Brinker, and I'm back with Nancy Mace, Congresswoman from the great state of South Carolina, and someone I think is going to help build a lot of unity in the party. I mentioned before the break your background at the Citadel, which has traditionally been a male-dominated institution, but you weren't exactly naive when it came to dealing with that military mindset. Tell us about that. Tell us about what led you there.
Well, my father was in the Army. He served in the Army for 28 years, and I greatly admired my father. And my mom was a retired school teacher. When I was young, my father commanded the first ever Ranger Training Brigade. And when the Citadel decided to open its doors to women in the summer of 1996, I raised my hand. I was a teenager, was an 18-year-old who had no future in sight, who had lost a lot of hope, and had no light to follow. And I felt like if I could make it at the Citadel, then I literally could make it anywhere. After everything I'd been through the previous 2 years, if I could make it there, I could make it anywhere. And decided to follow in my father's footsteps and follow him at his alma mater, the Citadel. And I've never looked back since. I know that I was just a girl who had a dream, and I set a few goals to achieve that dream, and I worked hard. And that is the American dream for everybody, and should be for everybody in our country.
And how right you are. What were some of the other lessons you learned there that have helped you in life?
Well, certainly the courage. We talked about that in our last segment earlier. Having the courage not only to speak up for myself, but having the courage to speak up for others, to give a voice to the voiceless. And I think that's one of the reasons that I've been so drawn to government and politics, especially as I've gotten older and my children have gotten older, being a strong voice, and now in today's world, in today's climate, being a new voice for the Republican Party. The other thing that I learned while I was at the Citadel was about having confidence, because if we don't believe in ourselves, then no one's going to believe in us. And that's true for anyone, whether you're in business or in politics, government, media, you name it. If we're confident in ourselves, then we can be successful.
You know, there was a very unsettling start to this year's 117th Congress as rioters stormed the Capitol, and I understand you were there. I'd love to get your reaction to that.
Yeah, I was there in the chamber that afternoon when we had our first joint session, and when that concluded, I was trying to get back to my offices in Cannon Office Building and was unable to do so because there was a threat. There was a pipe bomb found just a few steps away from the Cannon Office Building that I incidentally likely walked past to get into my office that day, which is so scary. But at one point I was stuck in the tunnels underneath the Capitol, and I read some police reports last week where some of the rioters were literally trying to hunt down members of Congress because they knew we were stuck in the tunnels under the Capitol. And I remember at that moment I was standing next to Dan Crenshaw, And I just remember saying, if anything bad happens, I'm going to be okay, because I'm here with Crenshaw, right? A military war hero, someone who served his country and who's now doing it in Congress. And I felt safe because I was with Dan. And so it was very scary. It was harrowing. And it's something I never want to see us ever witness again. And I had a very strong voice after that event. I've been very strong against Antifa and BLM this summer when we had riots across our country. If we don't hold ourselves accountable, then we can't hold the left accountable for their violence and their destruction of our country either.
Are those some of the incidents that happened there that day? Are they responsible for you wanting to have the option to be able to carry a firearm in Washington for protection? Did this incident drive that?
Yeah, specifically in DC. And the one place that we needed to have been able to carry that day was in the chamber. And that's the one place that a member of Congress is not able to carry if they have a permit. We can carry on Capitol Hill with the correct permitting. We can't carry on DC, but you can't carry in the chamber. I did apply for my concealed carry permit in December, and I did that based on a threat that someone threatened to shoot me on Facebook. When all of this was sort of starting to ratchet up, I didn't feel safe in my own district. And then when we got to DC, it got a lot worse. And I did fear that there would be violence on January 6th. And I honestly felt like a sitting duck. I had no way to protect myself or my office staff who was there late into the night as well. It was scary. And because the only thing between us and the rioters were the Capitol Police, and they were outnumbered.
So environmental protection is an issue often associated with Democrats.
Right.
But should Republicans also be playing a role in conservation? I know it's an interest of yours.
It certainly is. I live along the coast. I live on an island. Literally, I'm on an island right now as I'm sitting here talking to you. But we should be concerned about our environment and nature and preserving what we can, whether that's our coastal, our wetlands, where we hunt and fish. All of those things should be important to Republicans. But we've got to do it in such a way that doesn't take away freedoms and rights of others, and that doesn't subsidize clean energy. As a state lawmaker, I supported efforts, for example, to allow the expansion of solar energy in the state of South Carolina, and we did that without subsidizing it. And so if we can take that sort of free market, that love of the market, free market and competition, and take that and expand that to environmental issues, I think we could be very successful as a party.
Are your little girls excited about you being there overall, even with the disturbances we've had?
Yeah, my children are excited. Yeah, they were disappointed about what happened. And my kids are in middle school. I have a son and a daughter, and they're old enough to have seen the violence and the destruction. And for 2 or 3 days after, they were calling and texting with more frequency than they normally would have, worried about me and worried about me getting home safely. The other thing, and this is sort of one of the silver linings, is when I came home that weekend, I had them that weekend, and they were the most well-behaved I've ever seen them. And so it struck a chord with them, and that was their way of showing, I think, their love and their pride for their mom.
And good for them. We'll be right back with more with Congresswoman Nancy Mace. Stay tuned. I'm back with South Carolina Congresswoman Nancy Mace, and what a great one she is. You represent a truly beautiful part of America, South Carolina's Low Country, which includes the stunning city of Charleston, along with the resort beach town of Hilton Head. And these are big tourist areas. How are your constituents getting impacted by the COVID epidemic?
The tourism industry here has been likely the hardest hit of all of the industries in South Carolina's 1st congressional district. Fewer people are traveling, both personally for vacation and also for business. In fact, I had a call with some hotel owners earlier today about how much they're suffering, and their capacity is only at 40 or 50%. However, one of the things that we have done a very good job of, at least in South Carolina and as a whole in this district, unlike many states like California and New York that have totally shut down industries and cities entirely, we've largely been able to keep our businesses open for the most part and keep people safe from COVID-19. And our unemployment rate right now is hovering just over 4%. Now, mind you, previous to COVID, it was just under 2%. So we're not that far off. And so I think it's remarkable how some of our governors and mayors in some of these red states who've been able to balance being healthy with keeping our businesses open. It's been very healthy for our economy.
And how do you feel about vaccination? Will you be doing it, or have you done it? And would you make sure your daughters had it?
Yeah, I've had COVID. One of my kids had COVID and one did not. I do plan on getting the vaccination, but I'm waiting until everyone can get the vaccination. So right now there's such a limited supply. Because I already had COVID-19, I'm going to wait until all of my constituents can get it. And that means our frontline workers, those in nursing homes, those are 60 and older, our African American populations, because they're disproportionately affected. Their morbidity rates are much higher than other populations as well. But getting those people with underlying conditions, getting them in line first, and when the rest of us can get it, I'll be getting in line with everybody else.
Right. You stood firm in your opposition to offshore drilling on South Carolina's coast, earning you a perfect rating by the conservation voters of South Carolina. But that puts you at odds with others in your party, especially your colleagues out west who want to ease drilling restrictions. Help us understand how you clarify your position.
Well, the United States right now is a net exporter of energy, meaning we export more than we import. And so we're very strong from an energy standpoint in oil and gas. And in fact, if you talk to folks out in West Texas in the Permian Shale, I mean, they literally have to pay people to take away the natural gas from them. Now, we have an issue with getting natural gas to locations who are in need of it and who could use more. Those are challenges that we do have. But by and large, we're in a great place. And also the Atlantic coast, at least off the coast of South Carolina, not only are there environmental issues. We have an 80-mile-long coral reef off the coast of Charleston. We have travel and tourism as a main industry for us when times are good. Nobody wants to see rigs, whether they're on a boat or off the coast. That's important too. Our commercial fishing industry is important as well. Tourism, the environment, all that is important. And then when you put on top of it how well we're doing in the energy sector, it's just not a place that people want to go. And I was there when President Trump banned offshore drilling off South Carolina's coast for 10 years, something we all should be very proud of.
So do you feel conservation, responsible conservation, should be something Republicans should do a better job at as far as getting our position known?
I think we can do a better job, certainly, of communicating our position and showing not only the diversity within our caucus, our Republican conference, but we have a diversity of ideas and ideology. And if we want to be the party that is a big tent, that is welcoming of millennials and everybody else, because when you talk to Republicans who are in their 20s, climate change is a very important issue, and they vote on that issue. I do believe we can do a better job at a bare minimum of communicating those policies and the positions that appeal to those Americans that care about our environment.
I think what's great is that it's important to draw a distinction, which you do, that you don't have to support every single issue on the Republican platform to be considered a good conservative. You've never been shy to buck the party when you think it's necessary. How do you do that without creating adversarial relationships with your colleagues, or do you have to let the chips fall where they may?
Well, sometimes, like recent events, you do let the chips fall where they may. But I have tried to build relationships with people, even during crisis right now. I think it's really, for us, one of the opportunities I had in silver linings to being in that crisis over the last 2 or 3 weeks was really getting to know members of Congress I otherwise wouldn't have a relationship, whether that was Dan Crenshaw being stuck in the tunnels or writing a letter with Chip Roy. Talking to the leadership and having these discussions about where we need to go from here. All of these have been opportunities for me as an individual to build relationships with people, not only in my freshman class, but members of Congress who I otherwise wouldn't have that connection to anymore. And I'm going to work really hard to make an impact, to be a new voice for the Republican Party, because I want us to continue to win elections, not just the bare minimum, but I'd love to see us in the majority in 2022. I'd love to see a Republican president in 2024. And these are the things that matter, because when you look at the crisis when we're now with COVID-19 and vaccinations and businesses being shut down, and you look at the states that have kept businesses open and have balanced safety and health with an economic growth, those are the ones that are flourishing. Those are the policies that are going to be most successful for every hardworking American.
The political parties seem more divisive than ever. What can be done, in your opinion, to bridge the gap?
Lowering the temperature of our rhetoric. That is the rhetoric that we've seen all across the country for the last 9 months has led to violence, not just on Capitol Hill, but we've seen it in our cities. We saw it in May in my own congressional district with the King Street riots in Charleston. Millions of dollars of damage. People were injured. and harmed in a grave, grave way. But the rhetoric has led to some of this destruction. And as conservative as I am, and I mean, you look at my voting record as a state lawmaker, and when you look at it over the next 2 years in Congress, you're going to see someone who is very fiscally conservative and cares about those issues and is consistent. I use the Constitution as my guide. But I think there's a way that we can communicate with each other that doesn't bring harm to one another, because part of the American experiment, part of the foundation of our nation, is the ability to have debate, to discuss ideas, even when we disagree, but the ability to disagree and not be physically or personally attacked. I saw it in my own campaign when someone keyed my car on the day of one of my debates with an expletive, a 4-letter word.
Wow.
It happens on both sides. And if we as Republicans stand up and take and hold and take ourselves accountable, make ourselves accountable to this kind of thing, then we have the moral authority to hold Democrats and the left accountable. But if we don't do that, if we don't hold ourselves accountable now, then we don't have the moral authority to hold the left or Democrats accountable when they do it also. I think that's really important distinction as well.
Congresswoman Mace, you're great. Thanks for joining us today, and I hope you'll come back again. And
anytime.
Remember, thanks so much for joining us. And remember, Newsmax TV is a great app you can use and to watch us anywhere. Just download the free app on your iPhone or Android phone. That's all for now. Looking forward to our next conversation.